Rebecca Hayes never expected that pumping gas and selling energy drinks would prepare her for the most dangerous 47 minutes of her life. But when a cartel hit squad mistook her small-town Arizona gas station for an easy target, they discovered that some people's pasts don't stay buried, they just wait for the right moment to surface. What they didn't know was that the quiet woman behind the counter, who smiled politely while counting their change, had once been the most lethal sniper in Delta Force operations across 3 continents. And in 47 minutes, that mistake would cost them everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted the desert landscape in shades of amber and rust as Rebecca Hayes unlocked the doors to Desert Springs Gas & Go at exactly 5:47 a.m., just as she had every day for the past 14 months. The ritual was precise, methodical, a habit formed during years when precision meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure, though her current customers had no reason to suspect that their friendly neighborhood gas station clerk had ever operated in worlds more dangerous than retail. She flipped the switches that brought the fluorescent lights humming to life, checked the coffee machines that would soon dispense liquid caffeine to early morning commuters, and verified that the cash registers were functioning properly. Desert Springs, Arizona wasn't much more than a wide spot in the highway between Phoenix and Tucson, but it served enough truckers, travelers, and locals to keep the gas station profitable and Maria gainfully employed in the kind of anonymous work she'd specifically chosen. At 29, she looked unremarkable in the way that only comes from deliberate effort. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her uniform polo shirt hung loose enough to conceal the lean muscle tone that spoke of years maintaining peak physical condition, and her movements carried a subtle efficiency that most people interpreted as good work ethic rather than tactical awareness. She'd learned to modulate her voice to the kind of pleasant, slightly bored tone that customers expected from service industry workers, a careful performance that helped her blend into civilian life. The first customers began arriving around 6:15 a.m., starting with Jerry Martinez, a local contractor whose pickup truck guzzled enough fuel to make him a regular. "Mornin', Rebecca," he called out as he headed for pump number 3, his greeting carrying the comfortable familiarity of routine interaction. "Mornin', Jerry. Unleaded regular?" she responded, already reaching for the pack of Marlboro Reds he purchased every Tuesday and Friday. "You know it, and throw in some of that beef jerky, the good stuff, not the tourist nonsense." She smiled and selected the locally made jerky that cost twice as much as the mass-produced alternatives, but actually tasted like food rather than salted cardboard. These small interactions, repeated day after day with the same customers, had become the foundation of the ordinary life she'd built after leaving a world where her primary skill involved eliminating targets at distances most people couldn't clearly see. The morning progressed with predictable rhythm. Susan Whitfield stopped by for her daily Diet Coke and lottery ticket, convinced that her luck was about to change despite 18 months of evidence to the contrary. Danny Peterson, who drove long-haul routes between Los Angeles and Atlanta, filled his rig's massive tanks while complaining about fuel prices, traffic, and the general decline of highway food quality. Each interaction was brief, polite, and utterly mundane, exactly what Maria had hoped for when she'd chosen Desert Springs as her refuge from a past that had become too heavy to carry. Around 9:30 a.m., she noticed a black Suburban with tinted windows pull up to pump number 6. The vehicle looked expensive and out of place among the dusty pickups and economy cars that typically stopped for fuel, but Desert Springs occasionally attracted travelers who'd taken a wrong turn or were avoiding the main highways for reasons they kept to themselves. The driver remained in the vehicle while a passenger emerged to handle the fueling, a tall man in his 30s wearing designer sunglasses and a leather jacket that was both expensive and impractical for the desert heat. Maria watched through the security monitor as he operated the pump with the impatient efficiency of someone unaccustomed to self-service, his body language suggesting that manual labor was beneath his usual station in life. When he entered the store to pay, she noticed details that her civilian customers wouldn't have registered. The way his eyes immediately scanned for exits and potential threats, the slight bulge beneath his jacket that indicated concealed weapons, and the nervous energy that suggested someone operating outside their comfort zone. $47.50 for pump 6, she said, maintaining her practiced customer service tone while her tactical instincts cataloged potential problems. He pulled out a roll of $100 bills thick enough to choke a horse, peeling off a single bill with the casual disregard for money that spoke of either significant wealth or recent acquisition of someone else's funds. "Keep the change," he said, his accent carrying the slight musical quality of northern Mexico mixed with American English. "Thank you, sir. Drive safely." But as he turned to leave, Rebecca caught something in his expression, a momentary flicker of recognition that sent ice water through her veins. It was the look of someone who'd seen her face before, possibly in contexts that had nothing to do with retail customer service. Her hands remained steady as she processed the transaction, but every nerve ending was suddenly alert in ways that civilian life hadn't required for over a year. Through the window, she watched the Suburban pull away from the pumps, but instead of heading back to the highway, it drove to the far end of the parking lot and stopped. The engine remained running, the occupants clearly engaged in conversation, and Rebecca realized with growing unease that they were conducting some form of surveillance or planning session rather than continuing their journey. She'd chosen Desert Springs specifically because it was isolated enough to provide anonymity, but not so remote as to attract unwanted attention from people who preferred to conduct business away from prying eyes. The location had seemed perfect for someone who wanted to disappear into ordinary American life, but now she wondered if that same isolation might work against her if the wrong people decided that a gas station clerk had seen too much or knew too much. The Suburban remained in position for another 20 minutes, during which time Rebecca served 3 additional customers with her usual friendly efficiency, while simultaneously developing contingency plans for scenarios she hoped she'd never need to implement. Her military training hadn't included extensive counter-surveillance operations, but 14 months of deliberately ordinary civilian life had taught her to recognize when normal patterns were being disrupted. At 10:15 a.m., 2 more vehicles arrived in quick succession, a white pickup truck and a silver sedan, both pulling into parking spaces near the Suburban rather than approaching the fuel pumps. The occupants remained in their vehicles, and Maria realized with crystalline clarity that whatever was about to happen had very little to do with purchasing gasoline or convenience store merchandise. She reached for her cell phone to call the local sheriff's office, then paused as she considered the implications of involving law enforcement in a situation she didn't yet understand. Desert Springs was served by a sheriff's substation 20 miles away, meaning response time would be measured in tens of minutes rather than the seconds or minutes that tactical situations typically allowed. More importantly, involving authorities would mean answering questions about why a gas station clerk had recognized potential threats before they'd actually threatened anyone. The decision was made for her when the passenger door of the white pickup opened and a man emerged carrying what was unmistakably a military-style assault rifle, though he was making minimal effort to conceal it from view. The casual display of serious weapons in a civilian setting triggered every alarm bell that Rebecca's training had installed, and she realized that her carefully constructed ordinary life was about to collide head-on with the dangerous world she'd tried so hard to leave behind. As the armed man walked toward the gas station entrance, Rebecca's mind shifted into the tactical assessment mode that had kept her alive during operations in countries where American military personnel were definitely not supposed to be conducting the kind of missions that required precision marksmanship. The transition was as automatic as breathing and about as easy to stop. Suddenly, she wasn't a gas station clerk anymore. She was a weapon system, evaluating threats and calculating responses. The morning sun continued to shine on Desert Springs, Arizona, but Rebecca Hayes knew that the quiet life she'd built over 14 months was about to end, probably violently and possibly permanently. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The armed man entered the store with the swagger of someone who'd never encountered serious resistance, his assault rifle held casually at his side like a business briefcase. Rebecca continued arranging lottery tickets behind the counter, her movements deliberately calm while her peripheral vision tracked every detail of his approach. The weapon was an AR-15 variant, probably chambered in 5.56, with modifications that suggested someone had invested serious money in making it more lethal than the standard civilian model. "Morning," she said, with the same pleasant tone she'd used for Jerry Martinez and Danny Peterson, though her voice carried none of the tension that was coiling through her nervous system like a compressed spring. The man stopped in front of the counter, his designer sunglasses reflecting the fluorescent lights overhead. Up close, she could see the details that confirmed her initial assessment: expensive dental work that spoke of cartel money, clothing that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the kind of physical conditioning that came from regular gym access rather than military training. He was dangerous because he was armed and obviously willing to use violence, but he wasn't professional in the way that would have made this situation truly hopeless. "You Rebecca Hayes?" he asked, his accent more pronounced now that he wasn't trying to sound like a regular customer. The question hit her like a physical blow, confirming that her identity had been compromised in ways she was only beginning to understand. She maintained her composed expression while her mind raced through the implications. Someone had connected her current civilian identity to her military past, which meant either her false documentation had been compromised or someone from her previous life had given her up. "I think you might have me confused with someone else," she replied, reaching under the counter as if accessing something routine, while actually positioning her hand near the modified Glock 19 she kept secured beneath the cash register. The weapon had been illegally modified to accept 33-round magazines and fitted with a suppressor that would reduce muzzle flash and noise signature. Modifications that definitely weren't legal for civilian ownership, but seemed reasonable given her circumstances.
The man laughed, a sound that carried no humor whatsoever. "Phoenix Recon, Operation Desert Fox, 2019 to 2021. 43 confirmed kills across Syria, Iraq, and some places that don't officially exist on any military maps. Call sign Ghostwalker, because you could put rounds through targets at distances that made other snipers think they were witnessing magic tricks." Each detail was accurate enough to make her blood run cold. Ghostwalker had been her operational designation during the most classified missions she'd conducted. Operations that were supposed to be buried so deep in government files that accessing them would require security clearances held by fewer than 50 people in the entire United States. Someone with serious connections had burned her cover, and she was beginning to understand that this wasn't a random criminal encounter. It was targeted elimination. "Interesting story," she said, her hand now resting on the grip of her concealed weapon. "But I've been working at this gas station for over a year. I think someone's been watching too many action movies." "Carlos Mendoza," the man continued, apparently enjoying the psychological pressure he was applying. "That name ring any bells? Because he sure as hell remembers you. Took him 18 months to track down the woman who put a .338 Lapua Magnum round through his operation in Juarez. Killed his brother, scattered his people, cost him about $12 million in lost revenue." The memory came flooding back with crystalline clarity. A joint task force operation that had officially never happened, conducted against a cartel leadership meeting that intelligence sources had pinpointed to a compound 30 miles south of the Mexican border. She'd been positioned on an overlooking ridge, providing overwatch for Delta Force operatives who were supposed to capture rather than kill the primary targets. But the operation had gone sideways when Mexican military units, obviously bought and paid for by cartel money, had shown up to provide security for the meeting. Her precision shooting had kept American military personnel alive while they extracted under fire,
But it also eliminated several high-value cartel targets who'd been standing in the wrong places when the bullets started flying. The mission had been classified as successful, but apparently it had also made her some very dangerous enemies who possessed both the resources and motivation to track her down years later in a small-town Arizona gas station. Still not ringing any bells, she maintained, though her tactical assessment was rapidly shifting from defensive to offensive planning. The man in front of her was clearly not alone, which meant she was facing multiple armed opponents with unknown capabilities and unknown objectives beyond killing her. The worst-case scenario involved a coordinated assault that would turn the gas station into a kill zone, but the best-case scenario still involved armed confrontation against people who'd invested considerable effort in finding her years later. Through the window, she could see movement around the vehicles in the parking lot. At least 4 additional figures, all armed, all positioning themselves to control potential escape routes. The setup was professional enough to indicate serious planning, but it also revealed tactical assumptions that might work in her favor. They were treating her like a civilian target rather than a military-trained operator, which meant they weren't expecting significant resistance. "Carlos wants to have a conversation with you," the man continued, apparently unaware that she was cataloging his weapon, his positioning, and the locations of his backup personnel. "Nothing too complicated, just wants to discuss some debts that need to be settled, professional courtesy and all that." "I'm working," Rebecca replied, her tone suggesting mild annoyance rather than the combat readiness that was flooding through her nervous system. "Maybe you could make an appointment during my lunch break." The sarcasm seemed to irritate him, which was exactly what she'd intended. Angry people make tactical mistakes, and tactical mistakes were opportunities that can be exploited by someone with sufficient training and experience. His grip on the assault rifle shifted slightly, moving from casual carry to a position that would allow faster target acquisition. A change that confirmed he was preparing to escalate from intimidation to violence. "Here's the thing, lady. We can do this easy or we can do this hard. Easy means you come with us voluntarily, and maybe Carlos lets you live long enough to apologize for the inconvenience you caused his organization. Hard means we drag you out of here and take our time making sure you understand exactly how much trouble you've caused." Rebecca's military training had included extensive instruction in hostage resistance and escape techniques, but it had also taught her that the most effective response to threats was usually overwhelming counterviolence applied with surgical precision. Hostage situations rarely end well for the hostages, but tactical engagements could be won by operators who possess superior training, better positioning, and the element of surprise. Through the window, she could see movement around the vehicles in the parking lot. At least 4 additional figures, all armed, all positioning themselves to control potential escape routes. The setup was professional enough to indicate serious planning, but it also revealed tactical assumptions that might work in her favor. They were treating her like a civilian target rather than a military-trained operator, which meant they weren't expecting significant resistance. "Carlos wants to have a conversation with you," the man continued, apparently unaware that she was cataloging his weapon, his positioning, and the locations of his backup personnel. "Nothing too complicated, just wants to discuss some debts that need to be settled, professional courtesy and all that." "I'm working," Rebecca replied, her tone suggesting mild annoyance rather than the combat readiness that was flooding through her nervous system. "Maybe you could make an appointment during my lunch break." The sarcasm seemed to irritate him, which was exactly what she'd intended. Angry people make tactical mistakes, and tactical mistakes were opportunities that can be exploited by someone with sufficient training and experience. His grip on the assault rifle shifted slightly, moving from casual carry to a position that would allow faster target acquisition. A change that confirmed he was preparing to escalate from intimidation to violence. "Here's the thing, lady. We can do this easy or we can do this hard. Easy means you come with us voluntarily, and maybe Carlos lets you live long enough to apologize for the inconvenience you caused his organization. Hard means we drag you out of here and take our time making sure you understand exactly how much trouble you've caused. Rebecca's military training had included extensive instruction in hostage resistance and escape techniques, but it had also taught her that the most effective response to threats was usually overwhelming counterviolence applied with surgical precision. Hostage situations rarely end well for the hostages, but tactical engagements could be won by operators who possess superior training, better positioning, and the element of surprise. "Let me guess," she said, shifting her weight slightly to optimize her position for rapid movement. "You're the negotiator, and the guys outside are the muscle. Classic setup. Control the environment, apply pressure, extract the target. Probably worked great against civilians who don't know how to fight back." The man's expression changed as he realized that his target was displaying knowledge and confidence that didn't match the profile of a gas station clerk who should be terrified into compliance. Professional intimidation was most effective against people who didn't understand the tactical principles behind it, and Rebecca was clearly demonstrating understanding that made him reassess his assumptions about how this encounter was going to develop. "You're smarter than most people we deal with," he admitted, his tone becoming more cautious. "But smart doesn't stop bullets, and we've got enough firepower out there to turn this place into a shooting gallery. So here's your last chance to make this easy on yourself."
Through the security monitor, she could see that the armed figures in the parking lot had moved into positions that created overlapping fields of fire covering the gas station's entrance and windows. It was a competent setup that would make escape through conventional routes extremely difficult, but it also concentrated their forces in predictable locations that could be engaged systematically by someone with sufficient skill and proper equipment. The problem was that her proper equipment was currently limited to a modified handgun with limited ammunition and whatever improvised weapons she could create from gas station inventory. Against multiple opponents armed with assault rifles, those resources would require tactical employment that maximized their effectiveness while minimizing her exposure to return fire. "You know what?" she said, her voice carrying the kind of resignation that suggested she was beginning to accept the inevitable. "Maybe we can work something out, but I'm going to need to close down the register and secure the store before I can leave. Company policy and all that." The man relaxed slightly, apparently interpreting her compliance as confirmation that his intimidation tactics had been successful. It was exactly the kind of tactical mistake that could be exploited by someone who understood how to project false surrender while actually preparing for violent resistance. As she moved toward the cash register, her hand brushed against the concealed weapon, while her mind finalized the engagement sequence that would determine whether she survived the next 60 seconds. The morning sun continued to shine through the windows of Desert Springs Gas and Go, but Rebecca Hayes was no longer a gas station clerk. She was Ghost Walker. And these people had just made the fatal mistake of bringing a gang war to someone who'd been trained to win actual wars. Rebecca's hand moved with the practiced efficiency of thousands of hours of tactical training, drawing the modified Glock 19 from its concealed position in one fluid motion while simultaneously dropping below the counter to minimize her exposure to return fire. The suppressor added length to the weapon, but also provided the tactical advantage of reducing noise signature and muzzle flash, critical factors when engaging multiple targets in an enclosed environment. The cartel gunman's reflexes were faster than she'd expected, but not fast enough. His assault rifle was already swinging toward her position when her first round caught him center mass, the hollow point ammunition designed to transfer maximum kinetic energy while minimizing overpenetration that might endanger potential civilians beyond the immediate engagement zone. The impact spun him sideways, his weapon discharging into the ceiling tiles as he lost control of both his balance and his rifle. But Rebecca wasn't relying on a single shot to end the threat. Her Delta Force training had emphasized controlled pairs, 2 rapid shots to the center of mass followed by immediate assessment and re-engagement if necessary.
Her second round struck him in the upper torso before he could recover, and by the time his body hit the floor, she was already transitioning to address the external threats that would be responding to the sound of gunfire. The element of surprise had bought her perhaps 10 seconds before the armed men in the parking lot realized their negotiator was no longer controlling the situation. Through the security monitor, she could see them abandoning their overwatch positions and moving toward the gas station entrance with the aggressive posture of people who'd decided that subtle tactics were no longer necessary. She grabbed the dead gunman's AR-15, quickly assessing its condition and ammunition status. The weapon was loaded with a 30-round magazine, and she could see 2 additional magazines secured to his tactical vest. More importantly, the rifle was equipped with a holographic sight that would provide faster target acquisition than the iron sights she'd expected, a modification that suggested these people had invested serious money in their equipment even if they hadn't invested equivalent effort in tactical training. The gas station's layout provided both advantages and disadvantages for defensive operations. The large windows offered excellent fields of observation, but also created multiple points of entry that would be difficult to cover simultaneously. The fuel pumps outside would provide concealment for attacking forces, but would also create potential hazards if gunfire ignited the highly flammable environment. Most critically, the building's thin walls would provide minimal protection against rifle ammunition, meaning that her defensive position was essentially a shooting gallery that could be penetrated from multiple directions. Her tactical assessment concluded that static defense was not survivable against multiple armed opponents with superior numbers and equivalent firepower. The solution was aggressive offense that would disrupt their coordination and force them to respond to her initiative rather than executing their own plan. She moved to the window facing the parking lot, using the edge of the frame for cover while observing the approaching threats. 4 men were advancing in a loose formation that suggested they'd received some tactical training, but weren't military professionals. They were spreading out to create overlapping fields of fire, but they were also telegraphing their intentions in ways that could be exploited by someone with sufficient skill and proper timing. The first shot she took was at the man furthest from the building, reasoning that eliminating the most distant threat would force the others to close distance more rapidly than they'd planned. At approximately 75 meters, the AR-15 was well within its effective range, and the holographic sight made target acquisition almost effortless. Her round struck the target in the upper torso, dropping him immediately, and causing the other 3 to seek cover behind the fuel pumps and parked vehicles. But cover that concealed them from her position also limited their ability to coordinate their assault, and Rebecca intended to exploit that tactical disadvantage by maintaining offensive pressure that prevented them from regaining the initiative. She moved to a different window, changing her angle of engagement while the surviving attackers were still processing the loss of their teammate. Her second engagement was more challenging because the targets were now expecting accurate fire and had positioned themselves behind substantial cover. But the fuel pumps that provided them with protection also created tactical opportunities for someone with sufficient creativity and understanding of the physics involved in high-velocity ammunition. She aimed not for the men themselves, but for the concrete base of the nearest fuel pump, using the AR-15's penetration capabilities to create ricochets that would bypass their cover. The technique required precise shot placement and understanding of bullet trajectory after impact, but it was exactly the kind of unconventional marksmanship that had made Ghostwalker legendary during her military service. The ricocheting rounds forced 2 of the remaining gunmen to abandon their positions, exposing them to direct fire as they moved toward alternative cover. Rebecca's next shots were more conventional, center mass hits that eliminated threats with the kind of precision that left no doubt about her professional competence. The 4th gunman, apparently realizing that his team was being systematically dismantled by someone with vastly superior training, attempted to retreat toward the vehicles they'd arrived in. But tactical withdrawal required coordination and covering fire, neither of which were available to a lone survivor who was clearly panicking under pressure that exceeded his experience and training. Rebecca's final shot of the engagement caught him as he attempted to reach the white pickup truck, ending the immediate threat but also creating new problems that she was only beginning to understand. The parking lot of Desert Springs Gas and Go now contained 4 bodies and enough expended ammunition to attract serious attention from law enforcement agencies that would ask questions she couldn't answer without revealing classified information about operations that officially didn't exist. More importantly, the men she just eliminated were clearly advanced elements of a larger organization that possessed both the resources and motivation to continue pursuing her until either she was dead or they were convinced that further attempts were too costly to justify. Her phone was already ringing with calls from customers who'd heard gunfire and wanted to know if the gas station was safe to approach. In the distance, she could hear sirens that indicated emergency services were responding to reports of an active shooter situation. Within minutes, Desert Springs would be swarming with law enforcement personnel who would discover a gas station clerk standing among multiple bodies while holding military-style weapons that she definitely shouldn't have been able to acquire through legal channels. Rebecca moved quickly through the store, gathering the supplies she would need for immediate departure while her mind processed the tactical situation that was developing around her. Her carefully constructed civilian identity was now completely compromised, not just by the cartel members who tracked her down, but by the violent response she'd been forced to employ to survive their attack. The emergency bag she kept in her apartment contained false documentation, cash, and basic survival equipment, but accessing it would require movement through a town that would soon be under law enforcement lockdown. Her vehicle was registered to Rebecca Hayes, which meant using it would provide authorities with tracking capabilities that would make disappearance extremely difficult. But the dead gunmen had arrived in vehicles that weren't registered to her civilian identity, and their equipment included communication devices that might provide intelligence about the larger organization that had sent them. If Carlos Mendoza's cartel had invested significant resources in tracking down Ghostwalker, they would certainly have backup plans for the scenario where their initial team failed to return. As she prepared to abandon the life she'd built over 14 months, Rebecca realized that her situation had evolved from defensive survival to offensive campaign. The people who'd found her once would find her again unless she took proactive measures to ensure they couldn't continue their pursuit. Carlos Mendoza had made the mistake of bringing a personal vendetta against someone who'd been trained to eliminate entire networks of hostile organizations. The sirens were getting closer, and she could see dust clouds on the horizon that indicated multiple law enforcement vehicles were approaching at high speed. But Rebecca Hayes was already gone, replaced by Ghostwalker, and Ghostwalker had a war to finish. Rebecca had exactly 4 minutes before the first sheriff's deputy would arrive at Desert Springs Gas and Go, and she intended to use every second of that window to execute an extraction that would buy her the time needed to transition from reactive defense to strategic offense. The dead cartel gunman's phone was buzzing with incoming calls, undoubtedly status requests from handlers who were expecting confirmation that their target had been acquired. She answered the phone using the kind of casual Spanish she'd learned during cross-training with Mexican military units, hoping to buy additional time before the cartel realized their team had been eliminated. "Está terminado," she said, letting background noise from the gas station suggest that operations were proceeding normally. "Bueno, bring her to the warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. Carlos wants to speak with her personally before we finish this." The voice on the other end carried the authority of someone accustomed to having orders followed without question. "Copy that. En route now." She ended the call and immediately began stripping the dead gunman of useful equipment, spare magazines, tactical radio, and most importantly, the vehicle keys that would provide her with transportation that couldn't be traced to her civilian identity.
The black Suburban was equipped with modifications that suggested serious criminal enterprise funding, run-flat tires, ballistic glass, and communication equipment that was considerably more sophisticated than anything civilian criminals typically possessed. But it also contained intelligence materials that confirmed her worst fears about the scope of the organization she was facing.
A folder on the passenger seat contained surveillance photographs spanning the past 6 months, showing her daily routines, her apartment building, her regular customers, and even her grocery shopping patterns. Someone had invested significant time and resources in studying her habits with the thoroughness that suggested professional intelligence gathering rather than casual criminal surveillance. More disturbing were the additional photographs showing other locations and other faces, men and women she recognized as former Delta Force operators who'd served alongside her during various classified operations. The cartel wasn't just pursuing her, they were systematically hunting down everyone who'd been involved in the Juarez operation that had cost Carlos Mendoza his brother and his money. She started the Suburban and drove toward her apartment using back roads that would minimize exposure to law enforcement units that were converging on the gas station. The emergency bag she'd maintained for exactly this scenario contained everything needed for immediate disappearance. False documentation that would pass casual inspection, $20,000 in cash, and contact information for resources that could provide deeper cover if necessary. But as she approached her apartment complex, tactical instincts that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments began screaming warnings about the normalcy of the scene. The parking lot was too empty for midday hours. The maintenance workers she'd seen every Tuesday for the past year were nowhere to be found, and most significantly, there was a white panel van positioned with clear sightlines to her apartment door. The cartel had anticipated that their initial team might fail, and they'd positioned backup surveillance to monitor her residence. The emergency bag that represented her lifeline to escape was currently sitting in an apartment that was almost certainly under observation by people who would kill her the moment she attempted to retrieve it. Rebecca parked the Suburban 3 blocks away and approached her building using routes that provided concealment while allowing her to assess the tactical situation. The white van contained at least 2 occupants, both armed, both positioned to respond immediately if their target appeared. More concerning were the subtle indicators that suggested additional personnel were positioned inside the building itself, probably in stairwells or maintenance areas that would allow rapid response to multiple potential escape routes. Her apartment was a trap, but it was also the location of resources she couldn't afford to lose. The false documentation was irreplaceable on the timeline she was working with, and the cash represented the difference between successful disappearance and eventual capture by either the cartel or law enforcement agencies that were probably beginning to investigate the gas station shooting. The solution required tactics that would neutralize the surveillance team while providing sufficient time to retrieve her emergency supplies and escape before backup units could respond. It was the kind of problem that Delta Force training had prepared her to solve, but doing so would require equipment and positioning that she didn't currently possess. The dead gunman's tactical radio was receiving periodic status updates that confirmed the cartel was operating with multiple teams positioned throughout Desert Springs. They'd planned this operation with the assumption that their target might recognize the initial approach and attempt to flee, which meant they'd allocated resources for pursuit and containment scenarios. But their tactical planning was based on assumptions about her capabilities that were proving to be dangerously inaccurate. They'd prepared to capture a former military sniper who might possess above-average shooting skills and tactical awareness. They hadn't prepared to engage someone who'd been trained to single-handedly eliminate entire terrorist cells in hostile territory. Rebecca spent 20 minutes conducting surveillance of her own surveillance team, learning their patterns and identifying tactical vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The white van was positioned to observe her apartment door, but couldn't see the building's service entrances or emergency exits. More importantly, the occupants were focused on visual observation rather than maintaining 360-degree security awareness. She approached the building through the rear service area, using skills learned during urban combat operations to move through environments where detection meant immediate death. The service elevator provided access to her floor without passing through the main lobby where additional surveillance might be positioned. Her apartment showed signs of professional search, careful examination that was designed to gather intelligence rather than obvious ransacking that would alert the target to compromised security. The emergency bag was undisturbed, hidden in a location that had escaped their search, but accessing it required moving through rooms that might be monitored by personnel positioned elsewhere in the building. Rebecca moved with the deliberate care of someone who understood that survival often depends on patience rather than speed. As she prepared to leave with her emergency supplies, her military communication training recognized a pattern in the radio chatter from the cartel teams. They were coordinating movement that suggested preparation for a major tactical operation, something considerably larger than the simple capture mission they'd originally planned. The industrial warehouse that had been mentioned during her intercepted phone call was apparently the staging area for an operation that involved multiple teams, significant firepower, and coordination that suggested military or paramilitary training. Carlos Mendoza wasn't just pursuing personal revenge. He was conducting a systematic campaign to eliminate everyone who'd been involved in disrupting his organization. But he'd made the same mistake that had cost his brother's life during the original operation in Juarez. He'd assumed that superior numbers and firepower would overcome superior training and tactical expertise. Rebecca had 36 hours before the cartel expected her to be delivered to their warehouse, and she intended to use that time to remind Carlos Mendoza why Ghostwalker had become legendary for turning defensive missions into offensive victories. The war was just beginning, but this time she wouldn't be providing overwatch for other people's operations. This time she would be conducting her own mission with her own objectives against targets who'd made the fatal mistake of making it personal. Rebecca's secure phone hadn't been used in 18 months, but the encrypted number she dialed from a burner cell was answered on the first ring by a voice she recognized immediately: Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, her former spotter during 3 of the most dangerous operations they'd conducted in classified theaters of war. "Ghostwalker, I was wondering when you'd surface." Thompson's voice carried the grim satisfaction of someone who'd been expecting bad news and finally had confirmation. "Let me guess, someone with a Mexican accent has been asking uncomfortable questions about your current address." "Carlos Mendoza," she confirmed, using the cartel leader's name as a test to gauge how much Thompson already knew about their current situation. "His people found me at a gas station in Desert Springs. 4 down, but they had surveillance photos of at least 6 other Phoenix Recon operators." "Make that 5 other operators," Thompson corrected, his tone becoming noticeably darker. "Jake Sullivan was found dead in his apartment in Colorado Springs 3 days ago. Official cause of death was home invasion robbery, but the scene was too clean and the timing was too convenient. Someone wanted it to look random, but professional killers leave different signatures than desperate crackheads." The news hit Rebecca like physical impact. Jake Sullivan had been their demolition specialist during the Juarez operation, a career soldier whose expertise in explosive ordnance disposal had saved their entire team during the extraction phase when Mexican military units had attempted to prevent their withdrawal. If the cartel had successfully eliminated him, it meant they possessed intelligence capabilities that could track down operators who'd taken extensive precautions to disappear into civilian life. "What about the others?" she asked, though she was already dreading the answer. "Lisa Rodriguez went dark 4 days ago. She was working as a nurse in Seattle, keeping her head down just like the rest of us. Her apartment was cleaned out professionally. Someone with serious resources made her disappear without leaving evidence that would attract federal investigation." Thompson paused, and Rebecca could hear background noise that suggested he was in a moving vehicle, probably taking the same kind of evasive action that had become second nature during their military service. "David Chen is still active. Last known location was Denver, where he's been running a small construction business. Maria Vazquez relocated to Florida, where she's been working as a paramedic. Both of them received the same kind of surveillance attention that you're describing, but they managed to detect it and initiate countermeasures." The scope of the cartel's operation was becoming clear: systematic elimination of everyone who'd been involved in disrupting Carlos Mendoza's organization, conducted with intelligence resources and operational capabilities that suggest either significant corruption of American law enforcement agencies or direct cooperation from foreign intelligence services. This isn't just revenge, Rebecca realized. This is counterintelligence warfare designed to eliminate witnesses who could testify about cartel operations that intersected with classified American military activities. That's exactly what this is, Thompson confirmed, and it gets worse. Chen managed to intercept communications that suggest Mendoza isn't working alone. He's got backing from people with access to military personnel records, financial tracking systems, and surveillance capabilities that go way beyond what civilian criminal organizations can typically acquire. The implication was as disturbing as it was tactically significant. Someone within the American intelligence community was providing support for foreign criminal organizations that are systematically murdering former military personnel. The operation against Phoenix Recon wasn't just cartel revenge. It was treason being conducted at levels that could only be authorized by people with extensive government connections. "Where are you now?" Rebecca asked, already beginning to formulate plans that would require coordination with other survivors who possess the skills and experience needed to respond effectively to threats of this magnitude. "Phoenix," Thompson replied, "about 90 minutes from your last known location. Chen and Vasquez are en route to rendezvous coordinates that we established during our discharge processing. We figured that if someone ever came after the team, we'd need to regroup using protocols that weren't documented in any official military communications." The Phoenix Recon Extraction Protocol had been developed during their final deployment as a contingency plan for scenarios where team members might need to reunite outside of official military command structure. Each operator had memorized coordinates, communication procedures, and resource caches that could support tactical operations without leaving paper trails that could be compromised by hostile intelligence services. "Industrial warehouse on Boulevard, that's where they're expecting my delivery," Rebecca provided, sharing the intelligence she'd intercepted from the cartel communications. "Multiple teams, serious equipment, coordination that suggests military training. This isn't a simple elimination operation. They're planning something bigger." "Agreed." Chen's intercept suggests they're using our termination as a demonstration project for foreign clients who are interested in acquiring similar capabilities. Kill American Special Operations personnel on American soil without attracting federal investigation, and you've proven that your organization can provide services that go well beyond traditional criminal activities.
The tactical situation was now clear. Phoenix Recon was facing an enemy that combined cartel violence with intelligence resources and government connections that made conventional law enforcement response either impossible or compromised. Their former teammates were being systematically murdered to demonstrate capabilities that would be marketed to hostile foreign governments interested in eliminating American military personnel. But the enemy had made the same strategic mistake that had cost them their operation in Juarez. They'd assumed that superior resources and intelligence advantages would overcome superior training and tactical cohesion. Phoenix Recon had been selected and trained specifically for operations where conventional military support wasn't available, and enemy forces possessed significant advantages in numbers, equipment, and local knowledge. Rendezvous in 6 hours, Rebecca decided. Full tactical loadout, mission planning for offensive operations against hardened targets. We're not running anymore. We're taking the fight to people who made the mistake of declaring war on operators who specialize in winning wars. Copy that, Ghostwalker. It's been too long since Phoenix Recon conducted proper operations. After ending the call, Rebecca spent 2 hours acquiring equipment that would be necessary for the kind of operation she was planning. The cartel's warehouse would be defended by multiple teams with automatic weapons, but it would also contain intelligence materials that could identify the government connections that were supporting their assassination campaign. More importantly, Carlos Mendoza would be present for her scheduled delivery, providing an opportunity to eliminate the leadership that was coordinating attacks against former Phoenix Recon personnel.
Taking out Mendoza wouldn't end the larger threat, but it would disrupt operations long enough for the surviving team members to identify and eliminate the government sources that were providing intelligence support. As she prepared her equipment and reviewed tactical plans for assaulting a hardened criminal facility, Rebecca realized that her quiet life as a gas station clerk had ended permanently. Rebecca Hayes was gone, replaced by Ghostwalker, and Ghostwalker had a war to win. The cartel had made the mistake of assuming that former military operators would remain former military operators. They were about to discover that some people never really leave the war. They just wait for the war to find them again. The abandoned mining facility 30 miles northeast of Phoenix had been chosen as their rendezvous point because it offered tactical advantages that civilian locations couldn't provide: multiple escape routes, elevated observation positions, and enough isolation to conduct weapons preparation without attracting unwanted attention from law enforcement or cartel surveillance teams. Rebecca arrived first, using skills learned during reconnaissance operations to confirm that the location hadn't been compromised before exposing herself to potential ambush. The old mine buildings provided excellent concealment while she waited for her former teammates to arrive, but they also gave her time to process the magnitude of what Phoenix Recon was preparing to undertake. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson appeared exactly on schedule, approaching the rendezvous point with the careful precision that had made him legendary as a spotter during their most dangerous operations. At 34, he'd maintained the lean physical conditioning that special operations required, but Rebecca could see the stress lines around his eyes that spoke of 18 months spent looking over his shoulder while trying to build a normal civilian life. "Ghostwalker," he said, using her operational call sign with the formality that marked their transition from civilian refugees back to military operators. "Good to see you're still breathing. I wasn't entirely sure you'd survive the gas station encounter until I got your call." 4 hostiles eliminated, 0 friendly casualties, she reported, with the concise efficiency that military briefings required. But they had extensive surveillance materials and communication equipment that confirms this is a coordinated campaign with significant resource backing. David Chen arrived 20 minutes later, driving a pickup truck that had been modified with armor plating and run-flat tires, defensive measures that spoke of someone who'd taken the cartel threats seriously and prepared accordingly. At 29, he'd been the youngest member of Phoenix Recon, but his expertise in electronic warfare and signals intelligence had made him invaluable during operations that required monitoring enemy communications while maintaining operational security. "Marcus, Rebecca," he nodded to each of them, before immediately beginning to unpack surveillance equipment that would provide early warning if their meeting was being observed. "I've got updates on the intelligence situation, and none of it is good news." The final member of their reunion was Maria Vasquez, who'd served as their medic and secondary sniper during operations that required multiple precision shooters. Her approach to the mining facility demonstrated the same tactical awareness that had kept Phoenix Recon operational during missions where medical evacuation wasn't available and wounded personnel had to be treated under fire. 4 operators present and accounted for, Thompson announced once the team had conducted security checks and confirmed that their location remained uncompromised. 2 operators confirmed killed in action, 1 missing and presumed dead. Phoenix Recon is at 60% strength, but we're dealing with threats that require full team capabilities. Chen activated electronic countermeasures that would prevent their conversation from being monitored by sophisticated surveillance equipment, then began displaying intelligence materials he'd gathered during his own investigation of the cartel operation. "Carlos Mendoza is working with elements inside the Defense Intelligence Agency that have access to classified personnel records," he reported, his tone carrying the professional detachment that special operations personnel used when discussing matters of life and death. "Someone with high-level security clearances has been providing detailed information about Phoenix Recon members, including current addresses, employment records, and daily routine patterns." The revelation confirmed Rebecca's worst fears about the scope of the threat they were facing. Cartel violence was dangerous but predictable,
Criminal organizations operated according to patterns that could be analyzed and countered by people with sufficient training and resources. But government corruption that provided classified intelligence to foreign criminal organizations represented a threat that could only be addressed through the kind of operations that Phoenix Recon had been trained to conduct. "What's the timeline?" Vasquez asked, her medical training making her naturally focused on triage priorities that would determine which threats needed to be addressed first. "Immediate," Thompson replied. "Chen's signals intelligence suggests they're planning to accelerate the elimination timeline because our gas station engagement proved that their targets possess capabilities they hadn't anticipated. Instead of systematic individual termination, they're shifting to concentrated operations that will eliminate multiple targets simultaneously." Chen pulled up satellite imagery that showed the industrial warehouse where Rebecca was expected to be delivered for interrogation and execution. The facility was larger than she'd realized, with defensive positions that suggested serious military engineering and personnel deployments that indicated far more than simple criminal operations. 47 personnel on site, Chen reported, his electronic surveillance having penetrated cartel communications with the thoroughness that had made him invaluable during their military service. Military-grade weapons, communication systems that rival what we use during classified operations, and coordination that suggests either extensive military training or active military personnel operating under false flags. The tactical assessment was sobering. Phoenix Recon would be engaging an enemy force that outnumbered them more than 10 to 1, possessed equivalent equipment, and operated from fortified positions with multiple defensive advantages. Under normal circumstances, such odds would make offensive operations inadvisable for any rational military commander. But Phoenix Recon had been selected and trained specifically for operations where normal circumstances didn't apply, and conventional tactical wisdom would result in mission failure. Their specialization was achieving impossible objectives against superior enemy forces through the application of precision tactics that maximized their advantages while exploiting enemy weaknesses. "Mission objective?" Vasquez asked, though her tone suggested she already understood what Thompson was going to propose. "Primary objective, eliminate Carlos Mendoza and disrupt cartel leadership structure. Secondary objective, acquire intelligence materials that identify government sources providing classified information. Tertiary objective, eliminate threat to remaining Phoenix Recon personnel through decisive tactical action that demonstrates the cost of targeting American Special Operations veterans." Rebecca studied the satellite imagery while her mind automatically began calculating fields of fire, approach routes, and extraction scenarios that would be necessary for successful mission completion. The warehouse was positioned in an industrial area that provided concealment for approach but also limited escape routes if the operation attracted law enforcement response. More concerning was the intelligence that suggested government connections that went beyond simple corruption. People with access to classified military records and surveillance capabilities that could track down operators who'd taken extensive precautions to disappear into civilian life. "This isn't just a rescue operation," she realized. "This is a counterintelligence mission against hostile elements that have penetrated American intelligence agencies. We're not just fighting a cartel. We're fighting traitors who are using cartel violence to eliminate witnesses who could expose their activities." "Exactly," Thompson confirmed, "which means conventional rules of engagement don't apply. This is a direct action mission against enemy combatants who are operating on American soil with the objective of murdering American military personnel. Geneva Conventions don't cover this scenario, and neither does civilian law enforcement." The team spent the next 2 hours conducting mission planning with the systematic thoroughness that had made Phoenix Recon legendary during operations that other units considered impossible. Equipment was distributed, communication protocols were established, and contingency plans were developed for scenarios that ranged from complete tactical success to fighting withdrawal under heavy fire. As night fell over the Arizona desert, Phoenix Recon prepared to conduct the kind of operation they'd been trained for: precision assault against hardened enemy positions with objectives that went far beyond simple survival. Carlos Mendoza had made the mistake of declaring war on operators who specialized in winning wars.
And he was about to discover why Phoenix Recon had been classified at levels that most military personnel weren't cleared to discuss. At 0347 hours, Phoenix Recon initiated the most dangerous operation any of them had conducted since leaving military service, approaching the cartel warehouse through industrial terrain that provided concealment while forcing them to navigate around security measures that ranged from electronic surveillance to roving patrol teams equipped with night vision equipment. Rebecca moved through the darkness with the fluid precision that had earned her the Ghost Walker designation, her movement pattern designed to avoid detection while maintaining visual contact with defensive positions that could threaten the team's approach. The warehouse complex was larger than their satellite imagery had suggested, with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways that would complicate navigation during the assault phase. Chen's electronic warfare equipment had identified 12 separate radio frequencies being used by cartel security teams, suggesting a level of communication sophistication that exceeded what most criminal organizations could maintain. More concerning was the detection of encrypted military-grade radio traffic that confirmed the presence of professionally trained personnel who possessed equipment and training that civilian criminals couldn't acquire through normal channels. Overwatch in position, Vasquez reported through their secure communication system, having reached an elevated position that providing covering fire for the assault team while maintaining escape routes if tactical withdrawal became necessary. Her sniper rifle was equipped with night vision optics and suppression equipment that would allow precision elimination of key targets without alerting the entire security force.
Thompson had positioned himself to control the facility's main entrance, carrying explosive charges that would prevent enemy reinforcement, while creating the kind of dramatic distraction that would draw attention away from Rebecca's primary infiltration route. His role was to initiate the assault sequence while providing covering fire that would allow the team to achieve their objectives before enemy forces could coordinate effective resistance. Rebecca's approach took her through a drainage system that connected to the warehouse's service areas, allowing her to bypass perimeter security while positioning herself near the administrative offices where intelligence materials would most likely be stored. The infiltration route required movement through confined spaces that would leave her vulnerable if discovered, but it also provided access to areas that external assault couldn't reach. The interior of the warehouse was a revelation that confirmed their worst fears about the scope of the operation they were facing. Military-style command and control equipment dominated a central operations center, with communication arrays that could coordinate activities across multiple states and surveillance displays that showed real-time monitoring of locations throughout the southwestern United States. But more disturbing were the wall-mounted photographs and documentation that revealed the true scale of Carlos Mendoza's campaign against Phoenix Recon. Images of Jake Sullivan's apartment showed the crime scene that had been staged to look like random burglary. Surveillance photos of Lisa Rodriguez's final movements traced her disappearance with thoroughness that suggested professional intelligence gathering rather than criminal investigation. Most shocking was a large display board that contained detailed profiles of every Phoenix Recon member, including classified information about their military service records, psychological evaluations, and tactical specializations. Someone with extensive access to Defense Department personnel files had provided intelligence that would allow targeted elimination operations designed to exploit each operator's individual vulnerabilities. Rebecca photographed the intelligence materials while monitoring radio communications that indicated normal security patrol patterns were continuing without awareness of Phoenix Recon's presence. But Chen's electronic surveillance was detecting unusual activity in the communication networks that suggested preparation for a major operation scheduled to begin within hours. "Ghostwalker, be advised," Chen's voice carried urgent concern through her earpiece. "I'm intercepting communications that suggest they're expecting your delivery tonight, but they're also coordinating with additional teams for simultaneous operations in Denver and Miami. They're planning to eliminate Chen and Vasquez's families as leverage if tonight's interrogation doesn't provide the information they're seeking." The revelation changed the tactical situation dramatically. This wasn't just a rescue operation or counterintelligence mission. It was a time-sensitive operation to prevent the murder of innocent civilians who'd become targets because of their family connections to Phoenix Recon operators. The mission had just become personal in ways that would require immediate tactical modification.
Rebecca moved deeper into the warehouse complex, following intelligence materials that led her toward the detention area where Carlos Mendoza was reportedly waiting for her scheduled arrival. The route took her through corridors lined with weapons storage that confirmed the cartel's military-grade capabilities, automatic rifles, explosive devices, and communication equipment that rivaled what they'd used during classified military operations. The detention area was configured like a professional interrogation facility, with soundproofing and recording equipment that suggested systematic intelligence gathering rather than simple criminal intimidation. Medical equipment indicated preparation for enhanced interrogation techniques, while disposal materials suggested that subjects weren't expected to survive the questioning process. Carlos Mendoza was exactly what she'd expected, a man in his 40s whose expensive clothing and obvious physical conditioning spoke of someone who'd risen to cartel leadership through a combination of intelligence, ruthlessness, and the kind of personal charisma that could inspire loyalty among people who lived violent lives. But his presence in the interrogation facility confirmed that he intended to personally oversee her questioning and execution. "Senora Hayes," he said, as she emerged from the shadows with her weapon trained on his center of mass, his English carrying only slight accent despite the formal politeness. "I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. Please, have a seat so we can discuss the inconvenience you caused my organization." "I prefer to stand," she replied, her rifle sight never wavering from its target, while her peripheral vision monitoring for additional threats that might be positioned outside her immediate field of view. Mendoza smiled with the kind of confidence that suggested he wasn't particularly concerned about being held at gunpoint by someone he'd invested considerable resources to capture. "You killed my brother, disrupted operations worth millions of dollars, and cost me personnel who'd been trained at considerable expense. Surely you understand that such actions require proportional response. Your brother was conducting criminal operations in support of terrorist organizations that were targeting American military personnel," Rebecca responded, her tone carrying the matter-of-fact delivery that special operations personnel used when discussing classified missions. Proportional response was a precision shot that eliminated a high-value target while minimizing collateral damage. "Perhaps," Mendoza conceded, his demeanor suggesting that he was genuinely interested in the tactical discussion despite the circumstances. "But you also demonstrated capabilities that certain clients found impressive. Your precision marksmanship skills, your tactical awareness, your ability to operate independently in hostile territory. These are valuable commodities in the current global marketplace." The conversation was interrupted by radio chatter that indicated Phoenix Recon's presence had been detected by perimeter security teams. Thompson's voice carried through her earpiece with the calm professionalism that characterized all their combat communications. "Ghostwalker, security sweep is moving toward your position. Suggest you expedite primary objective completion and initiate extraction sequence." But Rebecca was beginning to understand that Carlos Mendoza represented more than just cartel leadership. He was a broker who connected criminal organizations with government intelligence sources, and his elimination would disrupt networks that extended far beyond his immediate criminal enterprise. The time for conversation was over. Phoenix Recon had a mission to complete, and Carlos Mendoza had just run out of time to explain why he'd made the mistake of declaring war on America's most elite soldiers. The precision shot that ended Carlos Mendoza's life was delivered with the same clinical accuracy that had made Ghostwalker legendary during classified operations across 3 continents. The .308 round struck him center mass before he could complete his sentence about global marketplaces, and Rebecca was already moving toward the intelligence materials while his body was still falling. But eliminating the cartel leader was only the beginning of Phoenix Recon's mission objectives. The intelligence documents she'd photographed revealed a network of corruption that extended into the highest levels of American intelligence agencies, with specific names and contact information for Defense Intelligence Agency personnel who'd been providing classified information to foreign criminal organizations. "All stations, this is Ghostwalker," she announced through her tactical radio while downloading encrypted files from Mendoza's computer systems. "Primary objective complete. Initiating secondary objective phase while you execute diversion protocols." Thompson's explosive charges detonated with the kind of controlled precision that drew every security guard in the facility toward the main entrance, allowing Rebecca to continue her intelligence gathering while the cartel's defensive forces responded to what appeared to be a frontal assault. The explosion also severed the facility's main power lines, plunging the warehouse into darkness that favored operators equipped with night vision technology. But Chen's electronic surveillance was detecting communication traffic that indicated the cartel possessed contingency plans for exactly this scenario. Backup power systems were coming online, additional security teams were being summoned from off-site locations, and, most critically, the simultaneous operations against Phoenix Recon family members were being accelerated in response to the warehouse attack. Ghostwalker, be advised, Chen's voice carried the urgent professionalism that characterized their combat communications. Intercepted traffic indicates teams are moving against civilian targets in Denver and Miami. Timeline is immediate. They're implementing scorched earth protocols. Rebecca's tactical assessment concluded that Phoenix Recon faced a strategic decision that would determine whether their mission achieved complete success or partial failure with ongoing consequences. They could extract immediately with the intelligence materials needed to expose government corruption, or they could engage in extended combat operations that might prevent civilian casualties but would also increase their own exposure to reinforcing enemy units. The decision was made for her when Vasquez's voice crackled through the radio with information that changed the entire tactical situation. Overwatch has visual on incoming vehicles, federal law enforcement markings, approaching from multiple directions. Estimate arrival in less than 10 minutes. Someone called in the cavalry, but I can't determine if they're here to help us or arrest us. The arrival of federal agents suggested that Phoenix Recon's operation had attracted attention from legitimate law enforcement agencies, but it also created the possibility that corrupted intelligence personnel might be among the responding units. More importantly, the presence of federal agents would complicate any extraction plan that involved continued violence against cartel security forces. Rebecca made the command decision that reflected both her military training and her understanding of the larger strategic picture. Phoenix Recon would complete their intelligence gathering mission while avoiding engagement with federal law enforcement, even if that meant allowing some cartel personnel to escape rather than risk confrontation with potentially legitimate government agents. All stations, this is Ghostwalker. Mission priorities are intelligence extraction and team preservation. Avoid engagement with federal units. We need to be ghosts, not combatants. Execute extraction protocols immediately. But as she prepared to leave the warehouse with intelligence materials that could expose the government corruption supporting cartel operations, Rebecca discovered evidence that the threat to Phoenix Recon extended even further than they'd realized. Carlos Mendoza's files contained contracts and communication records showing that similar assassination campaigns were being conducted against special operations veterans from multiple military units. The systematic elimination of American military personnel wasn't limited to Phoenix Recon. It was part of a broader operation designed to eliminate witnesses who possessed classified knowledge about government activities that certain intelligence agencies wanted to keep buried permanently. Jake Sullivan, Lisa Rodriguez, and the other Phoenix Recon members were just the beginning of a purge that could eventually target thousands of veterans. As she downloaded the final intelligence files, her earpiece crackled with Thompson's voice reporting successful completion of his diversion mission. Ghostwalker, perimeter charges are set and ready for detonation on your command. Federal agents are establishing outer perimeter, but they're not moving aggressively. Looks like they're waiting for someone with higher authority. The federal response pattern suggested that legitimate law enforcement agencies were responding to reports of criminal activity, but they were also being controlled by personnel who understood the classified nature of Phoenix Recon's operation. Someone in government was coordinating a response that would allow the team to complete their mission while maintaining plausible deniability about official involvement. Vasquez confirmed Rebecca's assessment with her final Overwatch report. Federal agents are maintaining containment positions but not advancing on the facility. Radio traffic suggests they're waiting for specialized personnel who understand the political sensitivity of this operation. Rebecca's extraction from the warehouse was conducted with the same precision that had characterized her infiltration, but now she carried intelligence materials that could expose corruption at the highest levels of American intelligence agencies.
The evidence she'd gathered would prove that Defense Intelligence Agency personnel had been systematically betraying classified information to foreign criminal organizations, resulting in the murder of American military veterans.
Phoenix Recon's rendezvous at their secondary extraction point was conducted under the distant observation of federal agents who made no attempt to interfere with their departure. The professional courtesy suggested that legitimate government agencies understood Phoenix Recon had been conducting operations that served American national security interests, even if those operations couldn't be officially acknowledged. Mission assessment? Thompson asked as the team conducted post-operation security checks while preparing for immediate departure from the operational area. Primary objective achieved. Carlos Mendoza eliminated and cartel leadership disrupted. Secondary objective achieved. Intelligence materials acquired that identify government corruption sources. Tertiary objective partially achieved. Immediate threat to Phoenix Recon personnel neutralized, but broader threat to Special Operations veterans requires additional action. Chen's analysis of the intelligence materials revealed the scope of the conspiracy they'd uncovered. Dozens of Defense Intelligence Agency personnel had been selling classified information to criminal organizations, resulting in the assassination of more than 30 former Special Operations personnel over the past 2 years. This goes all the way to the deputy director level, Chen reported, his electronic analysis having decrypted communication records that showed the systematic nature of the betrayal. We're not just looking at individual corruption, this is institutional treason that's been operating for at least 5 years. The intelligence Phoenix Recon had gathered would be delivered to federal agencies through channels that could ensure appropriate action while protecting the team from retaliation by the corrupted intelligence personnel they'd exposed. But the mission had also proven that Ghostwalker and her teammates remained capable of conducting the kind of operations that had made them legendary during their military service. 6 months later, Rebecca Hayes returned to Desert Springs, Arizona, where a new gas station had been built on the site where her quiet civilian life had ended. The FBI had offered her a position as a special agent specializing in counterintelligence operations against foreign criminal organizations, but she declined in favor of work that utilized her skills without requiring her to carry a federal badge. The private military contracting firm that employed Phoenix Recon specialized in training law enforcement agencies to respond to threats that exceeded conventional capabilities. Their students included federal agents, local SWAT teams, and international security personnel who needed to understand how exceptional individuals could be transformed into unstoppable forces when their skills were properly focused. But on quiet mornings when the desert sun painted the landscape in shades of amber and rust, Rebecca sometimes visited the memorial that had been erected for Jake Sullivan and Lisa Rodriguez, Phoenix Recon personnel who died because they'd served their country with distinction and had been betrayed by people who were supposed to protect them. The gas station where it all began now carried a small plaque that read, "In memory of all who served with honor and paid the ultimate price for freedom." Local residents assumed it commemorated military personnel who died in foreign wars, not knowing that it marked the spot where a gas station clerk had reminded the world that some people never really leave the fight, they just wait for the fight to find them again. Ghostwalker had found her way home, not to the anonymous civilian life she'd tried to build, but to the work that made the best use of her capabilities while serving purposes larger than personal survival. The war was over, but the mission continued, and Phoenix Recon remained ready for whatever challenges would require their unique combination of skills, experience, and dedication to protecting the innocent from those who would do them harm. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. The time for conversation was over. Phoenix Recon had a mission to complete, and Carlos Mendoza had just run out of time to explain why he'd made the mistake of declaring war on America's most elite soldiers. The precision shot that ended Carlos Mendoza's life was delivered with the same clinical accuracy that had made Ghostwalker legendary during classified operations across 3 continents. The .308 round struck him center mass before he could complete his sentence about global marketplaces. And Rebecca was already moving toward the intelligence materials while his body was still falling. But eliminating the cartel leader was only the beginning of Phoenix Recon's mission objectives. The intelligence documents she'd photographed revealed a network of corruption that extended into the highest levels of American intelligence agencies, with specific names and contact information for Defense Intelligence Agency personnel who'd been providing classified information to foreign criminal organizations. "All stations, this is Ghostwalker," she announced through her tactical radio while downloading encrypted files from Mendoza's computer systems. "Primary objective complete. Initiating secondary objective phase while you execute diversion protocols." Thompson's explosive charges detonated with the kind of controlled precision that drew every security guard in the facility toward the main entrance, allowing Rebecca to continue her intelligence gathering while the cartel's defensive forces responded to what appeared to be a frontal assault. The explosion also severed the facility's main power lines, plunging the warehouse into darkness that favored operators equipped with night vision technology. But Chen's electronic surveillance was detecting communication traffic that indicated the cartel possessed contingency plans for exactly this scenario. Backup power systems were coming online, additional security teams were being summoned from off-site locations, and most critically, the simultaneous operations against Phoenix Recon family members were being accelerated in response to the warehouse attack. "Ghostwalker, be advised," Chen's voice carried the urgent professionalism that characterized their combat communications. "Intercepted traffic indicates teams are moving against civilian targets in Denver and Miami. Timeline is immediate. They're implementing scorched earth protocols." Rebecca's tactical assessment concluded that Phoenix Recon faced a strategic decision that would determine whether their mission achieved complete success or partial failure with ongoing consequences. They could extract immediately with the intelligence materials needed to expose government corruption, or they could engage in extended combat operations that might prevent civilian casualties but would also increase their own exposure to reinforcing enemy units. The decision was made for her when Vasquez's voice crackled through the radio with information that changed the entire tactical situation. "Overwatch has visual on incoming vehicles, federal law enforcement markings approaching from multiple directions. Estimate arrival in less than 10 minutes. Someone called in the cavalry, but I can't determine if they're here to help us or arrest us." The arrival of federal agents suggested that Phoenix Recon's operation had attracted attention from legitimate law enforcement agencies, but it also created the possibility that corrupted intelligence personnel might be among the responding units. More importantly, the presence of federal agents would complicate any extraction plan that involved continued violence against cartel security forces. Rebecca made the command decision that reflected both her military training and her understanding of the larger strategic picture. Phoenix Recon would complete their intelligence gathering mission while avoiding engagement with federal law enforcement, even if that meant allowing some cartel personnel to escape rather than risk confrontation with potentially legitimate government agents. "All stations, this is Ghostwalker. Mission priorities are intelligence extraction and team preservation. Avoid engagement with federal units. We need to be ghosts, not combatants. Execute extraction protocols immediately." But as she prepared to leave the warehouse with intelligence materials that could expose government corruption supporting cartel operations, Rebecca discovered evidence that the threat to Phoenix Recon extended even further than they'd realized. Carlos Mendoza's files contained contracts and communication records showing that similar assassination campaigns were being conducted against special operations veterans from multiple military units. The systematic elimination of American military personnel wasn't limited to Phoenix Recon. It was part of a broader operation designed to eliminate witnesses who possessed classified knowledge about government activities that certain intelligence agencies wanted to keep buried permanently. Jake Sullivan, Lisa Rodriguez, and the other Phoenix Recon members were just the beginning of a purge that could eventually target thousands of veterans. As she downloaded the final intelligence files, Rebecca's earpiece crackled with Thompson's voice reporting successful completion of his diversion mission. "Ghostwalker, perimeter charges are set and ready for detonation on your command. Federal agents are establishing outer perimeter, but they're not moving aggressively. Looks like they're waiting for someone with higher authority. The federal response pattern suggested that legitimate law enforcement agencies were responding to reports of criminal activity, but they were also being controlled by personnel who understand the classified nature of Phoenix Recon's operation. Someone in government was coordinating a response that would allow the team to complete their mission while maintaining plausible deniability. Vasquez confirmed Rebecca's assessment with her final Overwatch report. Federal agents are maintaining containment positions but not advancing on the facility. Radio traffic suggests they're waiting for specialized personnel who understand the political sensitivity of this operation. Rebecca's extraction from the warehouse was conducted with the same precision that had characterized her infiltration, but now she carried intelligence materials that could expose corruption at the highest levels of American intelligence agencies. The evidence she'd gathered would prove that Defense Intelligence Agency personnel had been systematically betraying classified information to foreign criminal organizations, resulting in the murder of American military veterans.
Phoenix Recon's rendezvous at their secondary extraction point was conducted under the distant observation of federal agents who made no attempt to interfere with their departure. The professional courtesy suggested that legitimate government agencies understood Phoenix Recon had been conducting operations that served American national security interests, even if those operations couldn't be officially acknowledged. Mission assessment? Thompson asked as the team conducted post-operation security checks while preparing for immediate departure from the operational area. Primary objective achieved, Carlos Mendoza eliminated and cartel leadership disrupted. Secondary objective achieved, intelligence materials acquired that identify government corruption sources. Tertiary objective partially achieved. Immediate threat to Phoenix Recon personnel neutralized, but broader threat to Special Operations veterans requires additional action. Mission assessment? Thompson asked as the team conducted post-operation security checks while preparing for immediate departure from the operational area. Primary objective achieved, Carlos Mendoza eliminated and cartel leadership disrupted. Secondary objective achieved, intelligence materials acquired that identify government corruption sources. Tertiary objective partially achieved. Immediate threat to Phoenix Recon personnel neutralized, but broader threat to Special Operations veterans requires additional action. Chen's analysis of the intelligence materials revealed the scope of the conspiracy they'd uncovered. Dozens of Defense Intelligence Agency personnel had been selling classified information to criminal organizations, resulting in the assassination of more than 30 former Special Operations personnel over the past 2 years. This goes all the way to the deputy director level, Chen reported, his electronic analysis having decrypted communication records that showed the systematic nature of the betrayal. We're not just looking at individual corruption, this is institutional treason that's been operating for at least 5 years. The intelligence Phoenix Recon had gathered would be delivered to federal agencies through channels that could ensure appropriate action while protecting the team from retaliation by the corrupted intelligence personnel they'd exposed. But the mission had also proven that Ghostwalker and her teammates remained capable of conducting the kind of operations that had made them legendary during their military service. 6 months later, Rebecca Hayes returned to Desert Springs, Arizona, where a new gas station had been built on the site where her quiet civilian life had ended. The FBI had offered her a position as a special agent specializing in counterintelligence operations against foreign criminal organizations, but she'd declined in favor of work that utilized her skills without requiring her to carry a federal badge. The private military contracting firm that employed Phoenix Recon specialized in training law enforcement agencies to respond to threats that exceeded conventional capabilities. Their students included federal agents, local SWAT teams, and international security personnel who needed to understand how exceptional individuals could be transformed into unstoppable forces when their skills were properly focused. But on quiet mornings when the desert sun painted the landscape in shades of amber and rust, Rebecca sometimes visited the memorial that had been erected for Jake Sullivan and Lisa Rodriguez, Phoenix Recon personnel who died because they'd served their country with distinction and had been betrayed by people who were supposed to protect them. The gas station where it all began now carried a small plaque that read, "In memory of all who served with honor and paid the ultimate price for freedom."
Local residents assumed it commemorated military personnel who died in foreign wars, not knowing that it marked the spot where a gas station clerk had reminded the world that some people never really leave the fight. They just wait for the fight to find them again. Ghostwalker had found her way home, not to the anonymous civilian life she'd tried to build, but to the work that made the best use of her capabilities while serving purposes larger than personal survival. The war was over, but the mission continued, and Phoenix Recon remained ready for whatever challenges would require their unique combination of skills, experience, and dedication to protecting the innocent from those who would do them harm. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.